service
It's
to a particular person.
per person,
if
per
it's per
volume.
person, if it's per person, then you apply VAT. But on this slide, we just discussed whether VAT is applicable at all, whether Bitcoin is within the scope of VAT. And now we move to the next slide, because even if something is in general subject to VAT, it may happen that it's exempt. That's the second step. It's like everything, all services are subject to VAT in general, but there are exemptions. For example, for medical services. When we go to the doctor, we don't pay VAT. When we go to the hospital, we don't pay VAT. These services are within the scope because they are services for remuneration. We pay remuneration to the doctor, but they are exempt. So now we look whether a VAT exemption can apply to Bitcoin transactions. And this is a very, very tricky question. And there are the views of tax authorities in Europe and also around the world differ on that matter. And the list of exemptions is provided in the VAT directive, which is the main VAT law in Europe. And I've listed here two subsections, D and E, which could be relevant for Bitcoin transactions. And these are exemptions for financial services. If we first look at subsection E, because that's easier one, under this subsection, countries have to exempt transactions concerning currency, banknotes, and coins used as legal tender. So that's clear that Bitcoin will not fall under that provision because Bitcoin is not used as legal tender. So only items that are used as legal tender can be exempt under subsection E. But now we have subsection D, which is more problematic. It contains a lot of terms. It says that countries have to exempt transactions concerning the deposit and current accounts, payments, transfers, debts, checks, and other negotiable instruments. Now, of course, to see whether Bitcoin can fall under that exemptions, we have to interpret all those terms. We have to first decide what they mean. And the problem is that there are no definitions of those terms in the VAT law. So if there are no definitions, we have to use general rules of interpretation, and we have to look at the context in which those terms are used. So first on the list are deposit and current accounts. An account is usually an agreement between a customer and a bank, and this agreement gives rise to rights and obligations. Owning a Bitcoin doesn't give rise to any rights and obligations. It's not a formal agreement, so Bitcoin cannot be considered deposit or current account. Then we have at the end, we have other negotiable instrument. An example of this negotiable instrument is a check. But the ordinary meaning of negotiable instruments is these are documents that give that ensure that you will get a payment in the future, either at a fixed date or on demand. So Bitcoin doesn't give rise to such a claim, so it cannot be considered a negotiable instrument.
Well, I mean, every payment in Bitcoin is kind of like a digital contract in which you authorize the ownership to be taken away, ownership of the coins to be taken away, to be given to someone else. So, I mean, that's negotiable. You negotiated this, and so...
That's negotiable, but negotiable instruments are formal legal contracts. So like if you have a check, you have some tangible document that explains your rights and obligations. And in the case of Bitcoin, you don't have that. You get a Bitcoin, but whether you can use this Bitcoin to get money later on, that depends on the exchange rate of many factors. So it can be considered a negotiable instrument. And now we finally come to the most difficult terms here, payments and transfers. Of course, transactions in Bitcoin could be considered payments or could be considered transfers. And the question whether we apply VAT exemption is the question how we interpret those two terms. What it means, payment, what it means, transfer. And the general rules of interpretation say that we have here words with a broad meaning. Payment can have a very wide meaning, but this word is used here in a particular context. It's used with the other words. It's negotiable instrument, with legal tender, accounts, deposits. And that could mean that we have to interpret this word restrictively. payment can only be made using the items named in Article 35 of the directive. And if we apply this restrictive interpretation, then of course Bitcoin will not be exempt because payment in Bitcoins do not fall under any of the terms mentioned in the VAT directive. And we can also have a look how the VAT directive uses the term payment in other places. I had a look at that, and every time when VAT directive uses the term payment, it says about payment of VAT to the tax authorities. And of course, payment of VAT to the tax authorities can only be made with money used as a legal tender, and that could imply that this word is only used in this sense in the VAT directive. So the question whether VAT exemption applies or not is the question of interpretation. And how tax authorities interpret this. We have again different views. In some countries, tax authorities say that the exemption applies. So if we have any Bitcoin transactions, you don't pay VAT because this transaction is exempt. It's treated as a financial service. And this is the view of the Finnish and of the Belgian tax authorities. Also the UK Her Majesty Revenue and Customs has a similar opinion, but with exceptions. In other countries, tax authorities explicitly said Bitcoin is just an electronic service, it's not a financial service, we cannot apply the exemption. And this view is also represented outside Europe, in Australia and in Singapore. Both Australia and Singapore treat Bitcoin as electronic services. So nothing exempt, no financial services, it's just electronic service, just like we send electronic files, music files, videos. Bitcoin is this kind of services. And as there are many different opinions on that matter, the question whether Bitcoin is exempt or not finally reached the Court of Justice of the European Union. Last year there was a referral from Swedish tax authorities. That's the case David Henquist. David Henquist he was selling bitcoins, and he wanted to know whether he has to charge VAT on that or not. He asked Swedish tax authorities, and Swedish tax authorities said that we cannot determine that because VAT has to be uniform in the European Union. So if we say something and other countries say something else, that would not work. We have to ask the competent authority, and the competent authority is the Court of Justice. So this case is now pending. We don't know when the decision will be made. It can sometimes take 2-3 years until the court makes the decision. The referral was last year, so maybe at the end of this year, maybe next year, we will have clarity, at least in the European Union. The court must say whether Bitcoin is currency or not, and whether it's exempt or not. So this judgment is highly anticipated. And then we will see what the outcome will be. Of course, this will not be valid for other countries like Australia and Singapore, but at least in the European Union will be uniformity. The problem is that the court can only answer the question that is asked. And it was asked whether exchanges of bitcoins in traditional currency are subject to VAT or not. The court was not asked about Bitcoin mining. So even if we have a decision in that matter, we will still know whether Bitcoin mining is subject to VAT or not. We all think that it's not, but anyway, it would be good to have legal confirmation on that matter. Thank you very much. That brings me to the end of my presentation. If you'd like more information about Bitcoin and taxes, you can just write me an email. And there's also a YouTube video with a summary of my research explaining the tax aspects of Bitcoin, and also my PhD thesis is available online. But with the thesis, the problem is that it was completed a year ago, and of course, Bitcoin is evolving phenomenon, so many